to the Three Inning Fan Show with me, Kelley Franco. I am so excited about my guest here today because we have with us the former manager of the Astros, Angels, and the New York Mets from 2011 to 2017, including taking them to the World Series in 2015. Terry Collins, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure, Kelley. Thanks for having me on.
Now, the Yankees and the Mets are going right into the first Subway Series of the season this weekend. Tell us a little bit about your recollections from those series.
Well, they were big. They were huge. This interleague was just kind of getting underway a little bit, so the Freeway Series or the Subway Series was huge, and so it was very, very exciting. I will tell you, I there were more newspaper reporters, radio personalities, TV stations at the Subway Series than there was at the World Series. It was incredible. I walked into my first press conference, and I'll bet there had to be 12 or 13 TV cameras set up in the back of the room, and I said, "Wow, this is big in this area." So it was a great thrill. We had some good days and we had some bad, but it was a lot of fun, and certainly the energy in both those ballparks. You can't explain how exciting it is.
Sometimes we hear, players or a manager kind of playing it cool and being like, yeah, well, it's really just another series. It's not just another series.
No, no, it's not, Kelley. I mean, we used to, there was one of the years, we swept the Yankees. We beat them the four games we played them, and the last two were at Yankee Stadium, and we're leaving Yankee Stadium. The guys on the bus were talking about the Empire State Building being lit up in orange and blue. So, yeah, it means a lot. It means a lot. So don't think those guys don't know it.
How do the players get fired up for a series like that? Do they do anything different than they do for a regular series?
I don't think so. I just think that the fact that the fan bases and the people at the ballpark are so energetic, and they're so, that one year, we had the seven line at Yankee Stadium, and they sat in the upper deck, and of course we got an early lead in the game, and they made more noise, and I'm not sure they were ever invited back, to be honest. So, but and the players feed off that. I mean, you're looking at a situation now. I know the Yankees had yesterday off, but you could get into a situation where you've played 10, 11, 12 games in a row, and you're starting to get a little body fatigue, and then you walk in, and that electricity in that ballpark, the roars, the fan bases, they just pick you back up, and that adrenaline starts to flow again. So that's a big series.
I love it. I can't wait for it. In my marriage, I grew up a Yankee fan, and my husband grew up a Mets fan. So we call it the "Who's Going to Sleep in the Guest Room" series.
Well,
So
I hope it doesn't go that far, but it certainly is exciting for sure.
So, TC, for a lot of us, you represent the classic baseball manager that we know and love. Old school, unfiltered, feisty. You stand up for your players. Tell me, is Terry Collins one of a dying breed of managers?
Well, I'm sure there's guys today that still have the intensity that I had. They just can't show it anymore, Kelley. I mean, there's, due to replay now and all of the stoppages in the game, all of the things that go on now, I just don't see it anymore outside of balls and strikes. And now you can challenge. So, I mean, how many times are you going to argue over a ball and strike? And, especially when it's being challenged and it's, they're electronically finding the right call. So that intensity certainly just stays inside of a manager, I think. So it's pretty hard to exude it out in front of people. It just isn't going to happen with replay.
That's so interesting. I never thought about that. And does the game lose something with this kind of quality of the old school feistiness being weeded out of the regular play?
For me, the answer is yes. I've always felt the manager umpire interaction was part of the game. And there were, of course, some of the greatest managers of all time, Lasorda, Earl Weaver. I mean, there were umpires they didn't like, and the umpires didn't like them. And so, you knew something was going to happen if there was a questionable call on either side. So, I think that's missed. I think the fans now, again, you got to remember, Kelly, the new fans they're being trained of the way the game's played today, so they really don't remember what it was like when managers went out on the field to argue calls and stuff. So, I again, I think due to the way the game's played, you have to adjust as managers do. You got to adjust the atmosphere of the game today, and but I certainly miss it. I have, my relationship with umpires was always pretty good. I had one or two guys that I didn't care for. I didn't care for the job they did, and I'm sure they didn't care for me either. So, but nowadays, that may still be the case, but you can't show it. There's no reason to anymore.
So, in our current baseball climate, a lot of us differentiate the old school baseball guys with this kind of analytically driven school of thought. Is that a real divide, or is it actually a little more blended than we fans realize?
Well, it's tough for me to answer because I'm not around it much. I mean, I don't go to the ball. I don't go to many games. I watch, but I don't go to many. So I really don't know what goes on behind the scenes. I do know this. A lot of the numbers that people are talking about today, we knew that. You just didn't have, numbers. You just didn't have numbers sitting in front of you. When guys hung breaking balls, we knew that their rotation spin rate wasn't very good. I mean, now you see it. The answer is, how do you fix it? So even though the numbers may dictate something, who's going to fix it? The analytic guys, or the coaches? So I think analytics is a great tool for coaches. I don't think it has a big meaning for players. I'm really tired of seeing guys hitting 210, 215 because they don't think batting averages count anymore. Well, let me tell you something. Getting on base still is the most important thing in the game. You can't score runs if you don't get on base. And yes, home runs are a big part of it, but there's nothing nicer than a 3-run homer. I'll tell you that. So somebody's got to get on. I've always felt bad for Luis Ariz because I got to know Luis when I was helping the Marlins a couple of years ago. Here's a guy who won 3 batting titles in a row with 3 different teams because he was a singles hitter. Nobody wanted him on their team, except every time he looked up, he's standing at second base. Well, if I'm hitting third or fourth on those teams, I want that guy. Pete Alonso, he'd have drove in 175 runs hitting behind Luis Ariz. So, there are those guys and I think the numbers sometimes, again, I talk about, a lot about pitchers and stuff. Years ago, we all knew that the third time through a lineup was sometimes difficult. But I had one of the great pitchers in baseball on my staff in Anaheim, and he said, Terry, there's nights when it works. It's easy. My command's good. My mechanics are good. It's easy. My split's working. My curveball's working. I'm throwing strikes. I may throw 135 pitches and not even know it. And there's other nights where it's not working. And I look up in the third inning and I got 64 pitches and I'm out of gas because I had to get out of trouble in the first. I had to get out of trouble in the second. So just because numbers dictate things doesn't make it the gospel. And yet today it is the gospel. There are those, hey, 75 pitches, he's out. I remember I talked to Dave Roberts one time, and he told me that during a World Series, he was told by his analytics people that one of his relief pitchers could only throw 13 pitches. 13. How do you come up with 13? But the stats it says, well, this week, this guy should not throw any more than 75 pitches. Well, he's already now at 62. So he's got 13 more to throw in the week. I mean, everything's dictated by how they feel that day. There are guys, but I've had pitchers warm up who were sick in the bullpen, walk out and pitch a 2-hitter. And other times, guys feel great. They've had 4 or 5 days off. They're rested. They feel great, and they get their brains kicked in 2 innings. So for me, I think again for the coaches, I think it's something to teach or to work off of. But I don't think it should be the only thing you base decisions on.
I think that all of us can empathize with that because I know you're a golfer. I like to run and do workouts, and you have those days where you're golfing and you're just hitting them all straight and they're beautiful, or I'm running and I get runner's high, and other days where it's just a slog. And so you can't say, you're going to golf this every day or I'm going to run 6 miles every day because it's different depending on how you feel.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Kelly. And I totally agree with that. I've always said there's nothing nicer than a two-out single with a runner standing at second base. It's an add-on run. It gets you the lead. There's nothing wrong with singles. And I see guys today that with runners at second base, they're trying to pull the ball. They don't use the big part of the field. The old two-strike approach. Nobody even talks about it anymore. And that's why I see some of the teams that do it, and I think that's the way the game was meant to be played. Okay, I understand there's a new age and a new era and stuff, and that may be, that may work for a lot of people, but that doesn't work for everybody. And no team is built exactly the same. So I think you've got to know your team, and I think that's the part of the manager. He's got to know what he's got. When he goes to the ballpark, he can't have 9 of the same kind of players. You can't do it because if nobody can hit the ball inside, guess what you're going to see all night long. So you've got to use what your background and your experience and what the strength of each and every of those players is, and you got to maximize that strength. And today, and again, sometimes numbers don't talk about those strengths. There's a room in our game for overachievers. There's got to be the one guy who isn't blessed with the greatest talent, but he knows how to win. Give me 5 of those guys. Give me 6 of those guys surrounded by the home run guy or the big star. I'll take that. I'll take those guys because you win with those guys. And that ultimately is the goal of our game.
I totally agree. One thing I always used to love about Derek Jeter is I always used to say that he was a superstar that played like a scrapper, and I love scrappers.
Perfect example. Derek Jeter was the guy that you didn't want up in the 9th inning because he was going to get on. He was either going to get a single or he was going to walk. Plus, he wasn't afraid to steal second base in the 9th inning if you down a run. This guy, he knew how to win, and he prepared himself to win. And I said the same thing. When during those years he grew up, you had Garcia Parra, and you had A-Rod, and you had Omar Vizquel, all great shortstops. This guy won, and he won big because he played the game to win. And I totally agree with what you said about Derek. That's one of the things I've admired about him the most is, boy, when it came crunch time, he was a dangerous player.
So you mentioned Luis Ariz, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him as well. And I don't want to say he's disrespected, but I'm saying like when I grew up, he would have been, kind of a superstar, somebody that everybody wanted on their team. And now it's not that way. Is the pendulum going to swing back, TC?
Kelley, I don't know. I really don't. I wish I had the answer to that. I will tell you this. A few years ago, when I'd stopped managing, I was going through the minor leagues watching, I had Pete Alonso when he was in Double-A and those guys. So I was going through the minor leagues and I was sitting in the scout section, and a scout came to me one day and he said, it's really a shame. I said, what's that? He said, a player like Tony Gwynn probably couldn't play today. I said, what? Why would you say something like that? He said, well, he really didn't have any power. I said, this guy hit the ball in the barrel of the bat more than any human being I've ever been around. If you wanted him to hit homers, he could hit homers. He wanted to hit 350. That's the difference. Wade Boggs. I saw Wade Boggs in 1995, Kelley, at the All-Star game. I was a coach on the National League team, and the American League took batting practice, and Wade Boggs hit 25 balls in the upper deck in Texas during batting practice.
Unbelievable.
But when the game started, he wanted to get a hit. He wasn't worried about anything except hitting the ball hard and hitting a single or getting a double or, But and I'm thinking, hey, those great players, they could do those, especially those great hitters. They could hit the ball in the ballpark. Ichiro, people thought because he's a little guy, Ichiro had great power for a guy. But again, his whole job, and he felt the kind of player he was. His job was to get on base, and that's why Gwynn and Boggs were the same way. They just you looked up, and they were always standing on base.
Do you think that teams won more when we emphasized batting average more, or you think they win more now with our emphasis on slugging and three true outcomes?
Well, I'm sure there's an analyst someplace who could give you that answer. I don't have the answer for it, but I know there are teams that lose games because people don't get on base. I look up, I read the box scores, and there are 13 to 17 strikeouts almost every night. And, because guys don't want to put the ball in play. And for years and years and years, we used to say, a batted ball can be dangerous. Not every ball's going to get caught. Not every. I mean, there was a ball last night. I think in the game, somebody said it was a Bo Bichette's little bloop single that he hit. What was the exit velocity? 30 miles an
Right.
hour. But the point was, it drove in a run. You know what I mean? And that's the key, and that's why you put the ball in play, and good things can happen sometimes. So, and again, I went to a minor league game a few years ago, and was talking to this kid who was one of the prospects, and I asked him what he was working on. He said his exit velocity was down, and he was working on his exit velocity. He struck out 3 times that night. How's that working for you? How's that extra velocity working for you when you're not making contact? You know, don't you think you need to learn how to put the barrel of the extra velocity will come. And so I always think there's a process in all of this data that these guys are working on. You got to learn how to play first. Once you learn how to play, the other stuff, if you're a star, the other stuff falls into place. Talent plays in the big leagues. Talent plays. That's why you win. You win with talent. And so you put those talented guys out there, and you put a couple of guys, a couple of Luis Arises on your club, and you look up, and you'll be surprised how many games you're going to win.
When you were managing with the Mets, say, did the front office have a role in the lineup cards and who played and pitch counts and those kind of things?
No, they did not. Sandy and I talked about it. We talked, we talked every day, Kelley. He and I had talked every day. He never told me who to play. Never wrote a line. Never put anybody's. He just said, "Hey, maybe you think about giving so and so a day off," or "Hey, look, be careful of so and so's pitch count tonight," and that was it. There were no directives, and that's why I respected him immensely. He let me manage the team, and he was the general manager. And you know what? He'd come in with offer some ideas that he had when he watching the game, but he never forced me to do any of those things. And my last year, they started to send down matchups, the best matchups of having a certain guy. So and so should play tonight because his data speaks that this guy's pitching against us. He should hit this guy. And again, will he? Nobody knows, but the numbers say he should. So, and again, it could be a night where that guy absolutely his location's on, and you go 0 for 4. And at the start of the game, he was your best option against that guy tonight. So, again, it's played by people, and individuals, as you know, Kelley. Nobody's perfect. And so, even though the data may speak you may have an advantage. Sometimes the guy on the other side of the field, they're pros too. They're big leaguers too, and sometimes they win games, and they get a one-on mano matchup. They may win that one.
Would Terry Collins want to manage in today's game?
No, no. First of all, I don't. The only way you can manage today is you have to grasp what the numbers mean and how to apply them. I didn't have those, so I would have to start over learning what that was all about. Um, I think, managers today, I think that it's more, a lot of it's a motivational thing. I hear everybody, well, he's got a great relationship with his players. Years and years ago, a lot of teams won. They didn't like the manager, but they won because there were certain things. I go back to watching Bobby Cox manage. God rest him, and he had rules. You didn't wear sunglasses. You didn't, you wore your jersey. You wore your cap right. And some guys, they wanted that freedom. You didn't play for Bobby if you wanted that. And I go Tony La Russa, very similar guy. Hey, the game's played by one way. There were guys that didn't like Jim Leyland. I thought Jim Leyland was one of the best guys I've ever met in my life. But there were guys, because you can't please everybody. So I think the job of the manager today is to try to please as many of those guys as you can, because the data speaks for who's playing and who isn't going to play.
We're here with Terry Collins, the pennant-winning manager of the New York Mets in 2015. So, TC, what kind of manager succeeds in today's baseball climate? What kind of qualities does he have?
Well, they're all good. I mean, I know a lot of them, and they're all very, very talented guys. They're very bright. The manager who has the most success are the guy who puts the best players on the field. Because ultimately, I'm going to tell you, one of the greatest managers of all time is Casey Stengel. And he also is the manager who has one of the worst records ever in baseball. So, it's about those guys you run out there. and get them prepared and put them in situations where they can be successful. Because if they're talented and they're in situations where their talent plays, you got a good chance to win.
Love it. Love it. And I want to, because I know our time's limited here, I'd love to talk a little bit about the Mets if we can. They
Sure.
obviously, the past couple of weeks, they've kind of maybe had a little tiny pivot, but so far they're really having not the kind of season that any of us envisioned for them. And we can all see the record in the standings and we all watch the games and we know kind of what it looks like. But if I were to say to you, Dr. Terry Collins, please come in and diagnose the problem with the New York Mets, are you going to tell me it's a roster problem, a chemistry problem, a performance problem? What does Dr. Collins have to tell me?
Well, they're just not playing good. I don't know the guys because I'm not around them. But, I go back to the years and years ago, Kelly, the Oakland A's when they won big, they had arguments in their locker room every day. So I'm not sure chemistry is a big thing. I think talent's the most important thing. Um, but again, you get caught up, especially in that town, in that city, where every day you've got 10 or 12 sports writers reminding you that you are failing. They have no problem telling you, hey, look, you guys you're playing bad. What are you going to do about it? And so all of a sudden, these guys, they hate losing. Professional players, especially stars, they hate being embarrassed and they hate losing. They know the pressure's on them to succeed because that's why they're stars. And so they add more pressure on themselves to get the job done. And maybe they chase a little more than they would in the past. Maybe, all of a sudden the guy hitting behind them is in a slump. So you think you now have to step up and get the job done because you can't be a little bit with all that plate discipline because the guy behind you slumping. So there's a lot of that stuff that happens, but that you try to fix. And the most important thing is to make sure when they come to the ballpark, they're ready to play. They have routines that have worked for them in the past and will continue to work. And all you can do is play the game to the best of your ability. You can't expect certain guys to step up and carry your team. That's got to be the role of Lindor and Bichette and Soto. But the younger guys, hey, look, your job is just to go out there and play the game as hard as you can, as good as well as you can, and the big boys will come through. And when they're not swinging good, you're going to struggle. That's the nature of the beast. Back years ago when I was in Pittsburgh, and when Barry and Andy weren't swinging the bat good, we didn't win many games. So but I think their pitching's been fine. Their starting pitching's done a nice job. They've injuries are starting to make an impact, but I think that they're getting quality innings out of their starting pitching. They just gotta go out and play the game the way they're supposed to. I'm not saying laugh about it, but you got to have some fun, man. And losing's not fun. But you got to make it some kind of fun when you come to the ballpark. You got to love to be there. It's the greatest town in America to play baseball in. Grab it and use it as a motivation, not as a challenge. So I think they showed us 2 years ago that they can come from being way back and pick it up. And there's a lot of season left. And I know 100 games. That's a lot of baseball games. So all they got to do is get on a hot streak, and and I think they'll certainly get things going again. But they got to get their better. They got to get their good players back too.
I agree. I think if they can fight their way back to 500, then anything can happen. Once a team can get back to 500, it's fair game.
Yeah, Kelly. I mean, you're looking at right now. I always look at the All Star break. Okay, if you're at 500 at the All Star break, because the real good teams in the second half of the season they beat you. That you go back and look at all the real good teams. The second half of the season is when they won. When pennants are won. So if they can just like right now, you win, 7 to 10, and then the next 10 you win 7 more. Now you're right back at 500 again. Now let's get it going again. And okay, now it's end of June or something, and you're at 500 or you're a game above or a game below, but you're right there to where you can take off because now your guys are healthy, and you never know the second half of the season. And again, with the way the playoff system is today, you don't need 95 wins anymore to get in. So I just think they need to keep their heads up. I think Carlos has done a great job. He stays as positive as he can, but it's about making sure again that you put the right pieces together at the right time, and they start playing better.
Yeah, I think with these watered down playoffs that we have, really, you can get in. And with the way some teams are playing, a lot of teams are playing in the American League. Gosh, we could have a team that's playing under 500 make the playoffs.
That may be, Kelly. And you look at the last few years, those teams that win the divisions and they have those first 5 or 6 days off, they're getting beat in playoffs because baseball is a routine, is a daily routine. It's not one day a week. And you get hot at the right time, and I lived it in 2015. We got hot at the end of the season, carried right into the playoffs, and then we sat for 5 days waiting to play in the World Series, and the adrenaline just was gone when the series, because Kansas City they played right up until they were, we played them. And I think that routine, if the Mets get in and they have to play a wild card series and then they play a division series, I'll tell you what, they got a chance to be dangerous because they got some good players on that team.
So, before we get to our closer, there's just one more thing I would love your perspective on, given your just incredible wide swath of experience in managing TC. And that's that after last season, the Mets fired slash let go several of Mendoza's coaches. Some were fired, some they let walk, some their options they didn't renew. What does that do to a manager when his coaches are let go and he stays? And is it hard to bond with the new guys? Just your thoughts.
That is one of the best questions anybody's ever asked me, I will tell you.
Thank
I
you.
First of all, Carlos's relationship with those guys, he hired most of them when he got the job. So they're his guys. They were his guys. And when they were let go by front office people, that's a tremendous blow to the cohesion of the team. It's a little blow to the manager, like, you know, oh my God, because 2 years ago, a couple of these guys were heralded as great, some of the best coaches in the league. Eric Chavez, everybody was raved about him and the job he did with the offense. And I think it was even under Buck at the time. What a great job he did. And then, they had 2 years ago, he steps up with some of the young guys, did a tremendous job. Jeremy Hefner, everybody was raving about Jeremy, and all of a sudden you got stupid. Because you have a bad year. Now, as we know, when expectations are high and they're not reached, somebody has to fall on the sword. So unfortunately, the coaches were the ones last year, but Carlos has to do it, and he did it. And as you got to reach down inside, and you got to hang up your ego at the door and say, okay, I got to go get some coaches that are going to fit in with my perspective of how I want things done, that are knowledgeable in their field, can teach it, and then you got to let them do their jobs. So it's a tough situation because there's a lot of those guys, and I'm down here in Florida. I live in Port St. Louis, and I talked to Brandon Nimmo a lot. I mean, he really thought the world of Eric Chavez. So now he's not there. I'm sure Soto loved Antoine Richardson. They helped him on the bases immensely. So, but as players, again, it's all about adapting. You've got to adapt to the new voice, and you know what? You got to listen to it. You got to try to see how these new theories work for you, and you got to give them a chance to work. Because if you're stuck in this other thing, you're not going to get any smarter. There's otherwise always different ways to approach things. So obviously, with the way they've started out this year, it's been tough on all those coaches, I'm sure. So, but it's again, I think it's really hard for Carlos to walk in there. But you got to have loyalty, Kelly, on your staff. They've got to back you up. They don't have to agree with you. They got to back you up, though. Privately they can walk in and say, you know what, I didn't like that in your office. They don't need to tell anybody else. You got to be man up and walk in the manager's office and say, I think you maybe have to approach this a different way. And that's why, in my opinion, and I've seen it happen on every coaching staff, there has to be a coach that you can rely on as a manager who can come in and tell you to your face with no only good intentions in mind is that you're wrong and you're not going to hold it against him because he's looking out for your best interests. And I think if there's a guy like that for Carlos on this staff, I think he's hired the right guys.
Yeah, it doesn't do any good to be surrounded by a whole bunch of yes men in any business.
That's correct.
And look at the job that Jeremy Hefner's done with that Braves pitching staff after we all thought, oh no, they're in trouble at the beginning of the
I've been
season.
around him. He pitched for me, and I love him. And he's shown that he's studied the game, he studied the mechanics, and he's done a good job. And I hope the best for him. And again, a lot of coaches move on and have great careers. I mean, you look at some of the great hitting coaches years and years ago. They went to different teams and made an impact wherever they went. So I think that's the most important thing is that you can impact players no matter where you are.
Love it. Love it. Well, I know our time's limited, so I'm going to move right into our closer today, TC. So, besides baseball, my other love in life is food. And so, we close every show here at the Three Inning Fan talking about food, specifically what we like to eat while we're watching the ball game. Now, it can be while you're at the ballpark, if you have a favorite vendor, or if you're home on your couch in the peace and quiet watching the game. But, Terry Collins, what is good to eat while watching the ball game?
Well, I have to tell you, Kelly, I haven't been to very many games where I went to the concession stand. So if I did, I'd eat a hot dog for sure. At home, I sit and I love peanuts. So I have a nice I get them from a Virginia peanut company that runs by a friend of mine. He sends me these great peanuts, and I love to sit there and munch on some peanuts and have a soft drink or something. So that's what I would eat during the games.
And what kind of toppings do you put on your dog if you're at the park?
Mustard.
Me too. Only mustard.
Only mustard.
All right. You are, I was going to call you my paisan, but you're not Italian, but I'll make you my honorary paisan for the
That
day.
sounds great. That sounds great, Kelly.
TC, you have been incredibly generous with your time and with your insights. And I want you to know how much I appreciate having you on the show.
Well, I
Thank you.
appreciate you asking me to come on, and I hope to see you again at the Queens Baseball Conference next winter.
Amen to that. Thanks, TC. And folks, we'll see you all next week. Thanks for joining us. Bye bye.